Hello everyone, and this is BioPhoenix here, and today we're going to be taking a look at another series of games, but this time I'm only going to take a look at two, just because I don't want this to get too long. And as you can tell, this is the Hyperdimension Neptunia series. And the series is developed by two companies, and they are Idea Factory and Compile Heart. Now, something brief I just want to mention here, just because I found it interesting, is that the company Compile Heart is actually a spiritual successor company to, well, the company Compile, which is known for making the Puya Puya games. And the series was known for being published by NIS America, but nowadays the series is being published by Idea Factory, but the ones I'm going to be talking about here are all published by NIS America. So before we talk about the games, let's start talking about the general ideas of what this series is all about. And believe it or not, it's all about the console war. Yeah, you know that thing that everyone starts bitching about for the stupidest reasons ever? Yeah, well, they decided to turn that into a game. So to make things more interesting, they decided to take the concept of all the consoles being goddesses, and they all have their own personalities. So let's just go through the main characters first. So the first one you have is Neptune, and she is the goddess of Planeptune, and she transforms into Purple Heart. So she is based after the Sega Neptune, which never even happened, but they decided to include that in because why not, I guess. Anyways, her personality is very hyperactive all over the place, and of course she is very ditzy. But despite that, she's actually very strong, and of course when she transforms into Purple Heart, that's when she gets more serious. Then we got Noir, who is from Last Station, who transforms into Blackheart. Basically, she's the PlayStation. And she's your typical tsundere type, you know, the kind of people that always mask their true feelings. But when she transforms into Blackheart, she ends up being more competitive. Then you got Blonde from Louis, who transforms into Whiteheart, and as you can tell, this is based after the Wii, or, you know, Nintendo. So she's a quiet type who likes to read books and seems to be very innocent, but deep down she gets pissed off very easily, and when that happens she likes to say stuff like thunder tits and little shits. It's pretty great. But when she transforms into Whiteheart, she's very aggressive, so yeah, this is definitely one of those kinds of people that you just don't want to piss the fuck off. And finally I'll mention is Vert from Leanbox, and she happens to turn into Greenheart. So obviously she is based after the Xbox. So she's the more mature type who seems to be level-headed, and she's always caring because she doesn't have her own little sister, where all the other ones do. And when she turns into Greenheart, she's just a bit more serious, but everything else is the same thing. So generally speaking, this series is about all these four goddesses having a rivalry with each other, and sometimes there are other villains who interfere with it. So to sum it all up, there's also a lot of gaming related references, jokes, big tits, small tits, some as big as your head, lots of anime elements, and of course it's over the top and ridiculous. And that is pretty much it. So now we got that out of the way, let's finally get to talk about the first game in the series, which is just called Hyperdimension Neptunia on the PS3. There's also a remake of it on the PS Vita and on the PC, but I'm taking a look at the PS3 one. And it was released in 2011 in North America, 2010 for Japan. And it's an RPG, so with that being said, let's talk about the story finally. So it begins with the four goddesses fighting each other, trying to see who is the true goddess. But this non-stop war comes to an end because they all end up teaming up on Purple Heart. So she ends up crash landing into game industry, which is what the world is called, and she loses most of her powers and she has amnesia, because that always seems to happen in these kinds of games. But she happens to get saved by a caretaker named Compa, who is named after, well, Compile Heart. So after a big dilemma with bandages, Compa tells Neptune that the world has been filled with monsters that are getting more agitated ever since the goddesses started to fight each other. So Neptune takes Compa with her onto her adventure to try to retrieve her memory, and of course trying to get all the goddesses working together. But along the way they meet another character named IF, or sometimes called Iffy because, well, she is named after Idea Factory. So pretty much they'll have to travel together to the different lands, and of course have to do a whole bunch of goofy shit. And that's really the basic of what you need to know about the story within this game. So the story may not be anything extraordinaire, but it's really the idea and concepts that makes this game very different. And the substances are stuff that we've already seen already, you know, like the whole amnesia thing, and then of course all the character traits, yada yada. And to me, there's nothing wrong with that, considering that there's only like 7 different types of literature. But to me, the thing that makes this story more fun is the writing, and of course the whole over-ridiculousness. Now, I definitely understand that this type of thing is not going to be for everyone, but if you don't know me, all you gotta know is that I like a lot of dumb humor.
Shut your hole! I can't stand the way you talk all high and mighty! Get out of here, Thunder Tits!
So all I have to say left about the story is that it may not be anything mind-blowing, but it's at least too funny because of how stupid it is. And personally, I like that. So now, let's talk about the gameplay. So it's a dungeon crawler in a third-person view, and it has random encounters, and of course you can find treasure chests and you can break open certain areas with a hammer. And at the end of these dungeons you fight a boss and then you just go to the next town. So when it comes to the overworld view, it's basically just a menu system. You just pick where you want to go, and you can view certain cutscenes and take on different quests. Now if you want to travel to the different lands like Leanbox, Louis, and Lestation, so this part is kind of weird to explain, but basically, when you're trying to get to another area, you just gotta wait until which one is closer to you, because you can't just go to anyone you want, you just gotta go to the one that's closest to you, and you gotta cross a mini dungeon, and this can get kinda tiring. But once that's over with, you can get to go to the other lands, and you get to do more dungeons and within those lands, and yeah, that's basically all about it. So there's not a lot of exploration in the game and not many places to go. Yeah, there's different dungeons of course, but I find a lot of them just feel recycled, which can also get kinda tiring. So now, this is the battle system, so it's a turn-based, and each character has AP, which is action points, and the action points determines how many moves they can make in one turn, because there's a combo system where you just press a certain amount of buttons in any combination and shit happens. And you can customize your own combinations, which is fine and all, but I find that it can be really slow. And what I mean by this is that I find that the battles feel really slow because it feels like it takes forever just to kill one enemy. And you got different types of attacks like melee and gun. But one thing that's interesting about the gun attacks is that you can change the different type of bullets with elemental bullets. But I find using the items is kinda complicated for what it is. So to use an item, a condition has to be met, and you can set it to whenever your character drops below 50%, it would do it automatically. Now it may sound helpful that you don't have to worry about it much, but every time the items are used, it takes away materials. Now the thing that I don't like about this is the fact that, why couldn't they just keep it simple? You know, having an item option. I don't know why, but I just think it's just better to keep it that way and don't try to fuck with it. But when you try to use special combos, you can do special attacks like summoning a game disc. Or if you're using one of the goddesses, you can just transform by using HDD. So that's when you transform into Purple Heart and you're much more stronger and you can do special attacks. And those special attacks has to be done by using combos. And in case you're wondering why the enemies have 2 life bars, well, one of them is actually HP, and the other one is a defense bar. And once the defense bar is all the way at the bottom, that's when you can do more damage onto the enemy. Well, at least that's pretty simple to understand. So personally, I think the battle system is not very good. Like I said before, I think it's just very slow and it takes forever just to kill something. And the whole combo thing is just more of a nuisance than anything. Now I understand that they're trying to be different and do the stuff that is not in the traditional sense, but honestly I think that would have worked better. Because I find that fighting a lot of the monsters just feels like a chore. And it doesn't help that the enemy encounter rate is pretty high, so that just gets really annoying. But one last thing I should mention is that when you're in the dungeon, as you're using one of the characters, they have different special abilities, like Neptune uses a hammer, Compa uses a bell to call in monsters, which I really don't get the point of using that when the encounter rate is pretty high as it is. Unless you just want to be lazy and just grind like that, but that totally works in that regard, but other than that, I just never really use it. And IF can find invisible treasure chests, so that works for that. So when it comes to gameplay elements, it's kind of all over the place. But one thing that really does annoy the hell out of me is the fact that you can't even sell your weapons. So after you buy a new one and then you want to sell the old one because you don't need it anymore and you need some extra cash, well, it's stuck to you apparently. Personally, I don't think it's game breaking or anything like that, but it's just so dumb that I don't even know why they made it like that. So anyways, let's move on to the controls. So all I have to say here is that they're okay, I guess. So walking around the map does feel very slippery, but thankfully there's no platforming involved, so it's not like a huge deal. But I just want to mention that when you start moving around, it just feels really slippery and just weird. It's hard to explain, but it just feels really loose. But as for the inputs and moving around on the menus and stuff, yeah, that's all fine and dandy. So no complaints there. Then again, like I already said about the walking, it's not a huge deal because it's not like it's a necessity, but it's worth pointing it out. So let's get talking about other things, like the graphics. And personally, I find them to be a mixed bag. So as for the good stuff about the graphics, So the character designs and art style is very good, which I really like, and one thing that's interesting is that all the character designs were done by Tatsunoko. So that is pretty cool. Some of the backgrounds within the talking parts look nice and bright and colorful, and as for the still image parts, well, it is pretty well done, even though some of them are pretty ridiculous, but I don't have any problems with it whatsoever. Now as for the bad stuff about it, the level design is pretty lame for the most part, and of course, just the way how it just looks very bland and boring. It's a shame, because with a game as ridiculous as this, I was kind of expecting some really lively looking areas, but nope, they all look bland and boring. But other than that, I don't have any complaints about the graphics, because everything else is pretty good, it's just, the maps are just really ugly looking. So now, as for the music, this one is also kind of a mixed bag, because there's a lot of tracks in this game that I do like, and there are some tracks in this game that I don't like. But one thing I feel like I have to mention here is that the opening theme song for this game is pretty awesome. I find it to be really catchy, it gets stuck in my head, and well, I just really dig it. But as for the OST in general, well, like I already said, some I really like, and some I don't like. But at least it does fit well with the theme of what's going on, and of course with all the events. But I will say one thing is that most of the battle themes in this game I just don't like at all. And you're gonna hear them quite a lot, so get used to it. But it's not the worst thing ever, it's just mostly forgettable and just, not really appealing. So just like the graphics, the music is also a mixed bag. Now as for the voice acting in this game, I'd say it's not too bad. But I will say, the cast is pretty good, but I don't think it was the best they could have done though. So you have Melissa Fawn playing Neptune, who does a really good job of acting like a goofball. And then you have Noir, who's being played by Aaron Fitzgerald, who does a pretty good job. And then Blonde is being played by Wendy Lee, which is pretty awesome. And then Vert is being played by Tara Platt, and that's also pretty damn good. So far you're probably thinking, well, how is that not as good as what you would suspect? It's really the other roles I think could have been done much better. Like Compa being played by Christina V. Now, yeah, she's a really good voice actor, but I found she felt a little bit off at this time. Same thing with IF being played by Kate Higgins, it just feels a little bit off. Now, I wouldn't say it's terrible, it's just, I think it could have been done much better. Same thing can be said with the rest of the cast, where it's not necessarily bad, it's just, could have been much better. But I will say one thing quickly right here is that they actually did improve the voice acting as the series went on, even when they kept the same cast, but I'll get more into that when I talk about Mark II. Now, if you want to buy this game, so with the PS3 version, this game usually costs about $20, maybe a little bit less, but that's the most I've ever seen it for, at least recently. But if you want to get the limited edition, which I actually do have, this will usually cost you about $50 to $60. I'd say that's not too bad considering it's a limited edition that came out like a couple years ago. Honestly, I was expecting it to be a lot more than that, so thankfully it's not too expensive. But the general price range for a PS3 game is actually not bad. But that's just if you really want to get this version, because like I said, there are remakes out there for the Vita and the PC. But I'll just say it out right now is that if this game does somewhat interest you, I would at least say just stick to the remakes, because honestly this game is kind of underwhelming. So that leads me to the last thing. So, if I were to rate this game, I'm gonna have to give it a 4 out of 10. So I was pretty disappointed when I first played this game, mainly because I thought the whole idea of the game seemed really funny, and I thought it was going to be something I'd really like, but unfortunately, like I said, with some of these issues, I just couldn't get into it whatsoever. The only thing that was keeping me interested in wanting to play more was just to see all the hilarious shit, but the gameplay elements were just so all over the place that I just couldn't keep up. And what's really weird is that I ended up enjoying watching someone play this game more than playing it myself, which is not a very good thing, just so I can see all the funny stuff without having to go through all the boring crap. So with that being said, it was a decent concept that I was definitely disappointed in, and now it may not be like the worst RPG I ever played, far from it, but it definitely is not something I could recommend to other people, unless, you're just really die-hard into this. And as I said before, just play the remakes because they're just a lot better. So with the first game having a bumpy start, could they improve upon it with the second one, Hyperdimension Neptunia Mark II? So this will be the last one I'll be talking about within this video, but of course there will be more later on. So this one is developed and published by the same companies as the first one, but it was released in 2011 in Japan and 2012 in North America. And as again, this one also has some remakes like on the Vita and the PC. So without further ado, let's start talking about the story. In the year 2000XX, well, they only need one more X, but anyways, in the world of game industry, but within another alternate universe, so it had nothing to do with the first game, I guess you can say they just wanted to distance themselves as far as possible. But there is a group called ASIC that is being ran by CFW Magic, and her goal is to try and reincarnate R4 but into the deity of Sin. So the 4 CPU goddesses try and fight her, but that doesn't go out so well. So Nepgear arrives, and in case you didn't know, she is the sister of Neptune. And she ends up finding all the CPUs wrapped in, well, tentacle stuff. Yeah. And then Nepgear ends up getting captured, so whoop-de-doo from that. But much later, IF and Compa end up finding Neptune. They use the power of Sharesite, which is a crystal made from the hope of the people. But they were only able to rescue Nepgear, so they end up escaping then, and then after recovering from all that, that's when the journey begins. So Nepgear, IF, and Compa have to rescue her sister, and same with the other CPUs. So the three of them have to travel to different lands and try and get the Sharesite working again because it broke. And they do that by trying to get the mascot of the land masses. You know the ones like Lastation, Louis, and Leanbox. And of course you get to meet up with the other sisters like Uni, who is the sister of Noir. And then there's Rom and Ram, who happen to be twins, but they are sisters with Blonde. And as for Vert, well, she doesn't have a sister. Forever alone. And then there are some reoccurring characters, like Nisa, who is based after Nippon Ichi, and Gust, who is based after, well, you know, Gust. And then there's 5BP, which is based after a music company with the same name. Now these characters were in the first game, but I just felt like mentioning them here. But there are two newer ones, like Cave, who is based after Cave Co, and Falcom, who is based after Nihon Falcom, so that's pretty awesome. So the story is pretty basic to understand, and there's no real confusion to it, but it definitely still has a dumb humor, which I like. And oh yeah, in case you're wondering why this game is rated M instead of T, I think it has to do with one of the villains from that CFW, so we'll have to go through them all here quickly. So there's the leader, like I already mentioned, CFW Magic, and then there's CFW Judge, and then there's CFW Brave, who looks like a badass motherfucker, and finally, fuck, I have to talk about this piece of shit named CFW Trick. Reason why I say he's a piece of shit is because, well, he's a pedophile. Which is not only wrong, but even more wrong, and then so wrong that wrong can be, and then hell's ass fucking wrong. And I think you get the point, it's just fucking wrong. So I'm pretty sure that's the reason why this game got an M rating in North America. So I think that's the basic of what you need to know about the story, so now let's talk about the gameplay, and all I can say here is that things have definitely changed. So the map system is a lot better looking. So you move the cursor as an 8-bit sprite of Nepgear, and you pick the dungeon or city you want to go to, and there you go. But I have to say, it definitely does look a lot nicer. And there's no stupid dungeon tunnel that you have to go to get to the next city, thank God. So in the city, there's a shop where you can buy weapons and equipment and all that good stuff. And you can sell your weapons. I don't know why that was not implemented in the first game, but who cares, it's in this one. Then there's a guild where you can accept quests, and of course you get like rewards and whatnot. And then there's this thing called a chirper, which is kinda like Twitter. Get it? Chirp, twit. So you just talk to some of these characters, but sometimes an event will show up. But the weirdest thing in here is that goddamn TV with that guy's face on it. And now that I think about it, isn't that supposed to be a Fune? Well, whoever he is, just that face is just so damn creepy. And then there's Item Synth, which allows you to create items, although you unlock more items to be developed here when you get your Lily rank higher. And that's another new thing they added in here, was the Lily rank. So the Lily rank is the affection meter for all the other characters with Nepgear. So when you get high enough of certain characters, you can unlock certain different things, and it's a way to get multiple endings, because you can get an ending with every character, or just about every character. So that's the town, which is very simple enough. So now, let's talk about the dungeon. So this time around, it still has a third-person view, but there is no more random encounters. Instead, you just see every enemy on the field, and you can attack them as you please. And if you attack the enemy on the field, you can get an advantage. But if the enemy hits you from behind, then they have the advantage. But you can also find random items and invisible items on the field. And now there is save points, so you can save directly inside the dungeon at certain spots. Usually they appear right before an important event. So now, let's talk about the battle system, and all I have to say here is that it's definitely much more improved. So it's still turn-based, just like the first one, but they got rid of that whole combo bullshit, and everything is much more simpler to understand, much like a traditional RPG. Like attack, skills, standby, HDD, which is transform. So you can freely walk around in a circle. In fact, the whole circle idea kinda reminds me of Quest 64. But the orange shape in front of you is your attack range, and if the enemy is in there, then you can attack them. You can even hit multiple enemies at the same time, and when you attack, you can do 3 different types of attacks. And if you press R2, there is more options like items, so finally they got rid of that stupid idea that they had. The enemies still have the guard break, which is fine, and the AP still works the same way. So I'd say the battles are not only much more simpler, but it's actually kinda good. At least I kinda like it. There's not many games I know that actually have this type of battle system. Like I said, the only one I can think of off the top of my head is Quest 64. But I should also mention, if you have a lot of people in your party, you can actually switch them out in mid-battle. So that's the basic of what you need to know about the battle system, and well, I kinda like it. But one extra thing that you can do in this game that is pretty interesting is that you can actually use a custom template or canvas from your PS3's hard drive and then upload it onto the character to change the way how they look in HDD form. It's a pretty nice touch for customization. So now let's talk about the other things, like controls. And there's really nothing I can complain about here. The walking doesn't feel as weird as what it used to be, but as again, the walking in the overworld is not a huge deal. Even in the battles, the walking is pretty alright, so I have nothing to complain about there. But usually when it comes to RPGs, I don't really mention controls, or at least I don't talk about them much, because you're really just selecting a whole bunch of things. So anyways, let's move on to other things, like the graphics, and all I have to say here is that the graphics are a lot better than in the first one. So when it comes to the character models, they're pretty much the same thing, but I find in this one they do look a little bit better. And I don't think I need to mention that I do like the character designs in general because it is done by Tatsunoko. And the level design is better. Yeah, they do recycle a couple of maps here and there, but at least it does look a lot more appealing and not as bland and boring. Now, when it comes to the dialogue parts, this is the only thing about the first game that I like better in this one is that this time they just used the 3D models in those, and they do look okay, but I find that the way that they looked in the first one, where it's just 2D, I found it just looked a lot better. But that's only a minor thing. But as for the rest of the graphics, yeah, it's definitely much more improvement over the first one. But of course I should mention is that obviously I'm not comparing this game to the likes of a game that's not trying to be an anime style, but as for games that are in an anime style, I do find this game does look pretty nice. So now let's move on to the music, and the music in this one is also, as again, a lot better than in the first one. So when it comes to the opening theme song, I do find it to be just as good as the opening theme from the first one, as again it's just also really catchy. But as for the OST in general, I really like it, so not only does it suit the theme very well, but there's a lot more songs in here that I liked more than songs that were in the first one. But probably 2 of my favorite songs on this OST would have to be The Four Phalions and The Dancing Girl, and that's because it has a heavy guitar riffs, which I really like. So I really don't have any complaints about the music in this one. Sure, it does have its weird songs, but in general, I do like most of them. Now, when it comes to the voice acting, I'd say this one is a lot better. So when it comes to the 4 CPUs, they're voiced by the same people from the first one, and they're just as good here. But as for the newer ones, so you have Nepgear, who is being voiced by Christine Marie Cabanos, and I think she did a pretty good job here. Yeah, her voice can get kind of annoying at times, but for the most part, I'd say she did do a pretty good job. And then Uni is being played by Sarah Williams, and I think she did a pretty good job here as well. And then Ram is being played by Shelby Lindsay, and I think she does an alright job. I'm not too familiar with her voice work, but from the ones I do remember hearing her voice in, I think she's alright. And then Rom is being played by Kira Kiranen, and she does do a really good job as to be expected. In fact, I didn't even know it was her because it was just so vastly different. And then Compa and IF are voiced by the same people as they were in the first one, and I'd say they definitely did a better job here. Now, like I said in the first one, they did felt a little bit off, but I think in this one they got a better understanding of what the characters are like. And 2 more I'll mention, so CFW Brave is being voiced by David Vincent, and I think he does a really good job. I always enjoyed his voice work, and the fact that he did one of my favorite bad guys in this game, that's definitely awesome. So the last one I'm going to be mentioning here will be the sick fuck himself, CFW Trick, and he's being played by Derek Prince. Now, he is a really good voice actor, and I think he did do a really good job as being a creepy fuckhead. I mean, if you ever heard his lines in this game, it's really cringy.
Superb! Oh, so lovely. Even my hostage is a cute little maiden.
But yeah, I do wonder what he thought when he had to read those lines out loud. He must have been like, what the fuck am I getting myself into? But anyways, overall, I'd say the voice acting is definitely much more improved. Although I can understand some people not liking it for the fact it can get kind of annoying, and that I can kind of understand, so no worries there. Now, if you want to buy this one is still at $30. I'm actually a bit surprised this one is that much, although I'm sure you could find it a bit cheaper than that, but I haven't seen one recently. Then again, a lot of these NIS games on the PS3, I just don't see them that often anymore. But usually they're not too expensive, so at least that's a good thing. But if you want to get the collector's edition of this game, well, be prepared to pay out the nose. So the general price on that is usually like $150 to $250. Yeah, that's kind of a lot. Although you do get some pretty cool shit, like I know you get a deck of cards, which is kind of interesting. But I did see one person selling the Japanese version of the collector's edition for $50, which I think is much better. But that's just if you really want the whole goodies and such. But if you want the actual game itself, then it shouldn't cost you too much. At least as of right now anyways. So now, as for the score, if I were to rate this game, I'm gonna have to give it a 7 out of 10. Now, before we get more into it, one thing you're probably thinking is that, you know, because you said that the first game kinda sucked, why were you so naive about getting this one? That's because I really liked the idea of the first game, and when they announced the second one and that it was coming out over here, I was kinda thinking to myself, I really hope they actually improve it, so instead I went into it blindly, hoping to at least be better, and guess what? It was better. Now, this is definitely not the best RPG you'll ever play on the PS3, but I would at least say that I did enjoy it quite a bit for what it was. But you also gotta remember, I like a lot of these goofy balls to the wall kinda shit, and I still found that this game's humor was still very funny to me. And more importantly, the gameplay was just an overall improvement, and I really liked the battle system. And everything else was just easy to understand, and I really don't have any much problems with it. Although, yeah, this game does require a lot of grinding in between every single boss that you're gonna have to fight, but that's totally fine. But like I said before, I can totally understand people not getting into this one. Mainly because it's just so goddamn weird, but as I said a bunch of times before, I like weird shit. So personally, I do like this game. Sure, it's not the best of its kind, but I'd say it's pretty good, which is why I'm giving it a 7. And now that I said that, I wouldn't be surprised if I got a bunch of comments of people calling me a weeboo or whatever, but let's be real here. The reason why I play these games has nothing to do with the tits and asses. It all has to do with the fact that I like the concept and I find it to be really funny and balls to the wall ridiculous. So anyways, that's my opinion on Mark II. And that'll take us to the end of Neptunia Games Part 1. And yeah, there will be a Part 2, and they will probably be talking about Victory on the PS3 and V2 on the PS4. And there's a whole slew of spin-offs as well, but I'll get there when I get there. So now let's end this thing. Thanks for watching and commenting.
Nepgear is so gonna be my waifu!